Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today, and a tough one, but let's get through it together. What horrible things have you seen that will mess you up for a very long time? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I was an EMT for 5 years. I saw lots of messed up stuff, but the one that haunts me still is this. An old man goes crazy and shoots his wife. He then calls 911 and mumbles about cats. We arrive on scene, and I see a cop at the top of the stairs. His face is ghost white. I get up there to find his wife in bed with the back of her head blown off. Worst part, she's still alive, physically anyway. We attempt to keep her alive, but there's nothing we can do. Her brains are all over the headboard. She's making crying noises until she dies in the back of the ambulance. I still get nauseous thinking about it. Her husband was sitting outside the whole time we were in the house, mumbling about cats. I don't know whatever happened to him. When I was little, like 4 or 5, I couldn't sleep. So I got out of bed and walked out to the living room where my parents were watching a movie. All I remember was this man pulling the skin off of an alien. The man then gets dragged by aliens through this tunnel. Scared the crap out of me. Ever since then, I've been freaked out by aliens. I learned recently that the name of the movie was Fire in the Sky, based on the man's story of what happened to him while he was in the White Mountains in Arizona where I live. F. Basic training. One of the lads training with me decided to turn the rifle on me, round in the chamber, and start telling me he hated me, despised me, and flat out felt disgusted to be around me. The idea that someone on my side could do that scared the shit out of me. Death doesn't scare me. The idea that someone who I be shoulder to shoulder with could be that effing screwy worried me to no end. It played hell with my head for a few years actually. Most of my issues stemmed from the forces, and I'm effing glad to be rid of them now. I had discovered a car wreck one night. The vehicle was facing eastbound in a westbound lane. The driver was not wearing a seatbelt and was thrown around in the car and ended up being half ejected from the back window. Not only was his torso cut pretty bad from the glass, almost in half, but his head was hanging by a thread. Bad terminology, I apologize. The sight alone was unnerving, but the thing that got me the most was the smell. I've never smelled anything like it before, and if I never do again, I will be lucky. I had a lot of nightmares after that, and even if I smell blood from a small cut, it reminds me of this. I was in the Navy for 9 years. I did 3 deployments, all of them on the USS Abraham Lincoln, CVN-72. My first deployment was in the fall of 2004. We were in Hong Kong for Christmas. I'm not 100% sure of the day that we pulled out of port. I think it was the 27th. We were supposed to go to Korea after Hong Kong, but when we pulled out of port, we turned south. We'd all heard about the tsunami, and it wasn't hard to figure out where we were going. When we got to Sumatra, off the coast near Banda Aceh, we first went to the side of the island that the current was pushing towards. The water was filthy and full of debris. It didn't really occur to us what else would be floating in the water. While I was working on the flight deck, just after we had gotten there, I heard a yell from one of the catwalks. I headed over thinking someone had gotten hurt or messed something up on an aircraft. When I got to the catwalk, there was a group of people pointing at the water. I looked down and saw a lot of debris but couldn't really identify anything. Then I saw a kind of pale-colored blob. It took a second to focus, but then I realized that I was looking at the corpse of a baby. It was missing a leg, but the diaper was still on. At that point, my mind just kind of turned off, wouldn't let me have a conscious thought about it. Later that night, I was out in one of the smoking areas, leaning on the railing and just kind of numbly staring at the water. I had kind of a weird, ominous feeling that something bad was going to happen. I was trying to shake it off as just a bit of shock from seeing the baby earlier, and I just had started to calm down a bit. I saw another corpse. This one was a woman. All of the clothes had been shredded. The body was pale and bloated, and the head was gone. We spent about a month off the coast of Banda Aceh. We used the ship's desalinization plant to produce fresh water, which we shipped ashore. We also used our stores of food and medical supplies to give aid to the survivors. Our helicopters flew from the first light until it was too dark to see. We actually lost a helicopter while we were there. It was about 300 feet up and lost power, dropped into a rice field. Everyone survived. Worst injury was a dislocated hip. A good friend of mine was supposed to be on that helo, but swapped with someone else at the last minute. Those of us that were willing to got the chance to go ashore and help with the relief effort. We would fly in on a helo in the morning and spend the day helping to load supplies onto trucks and helicopters to be distributed to those that needed them. While we were flying in, I watched the shore come toward us. We flew over what looked like a very dirty beach, the kind where currents have pushed trash up or where people just dump things. We got a little farther in, and I started seeing straight lines, squares, and rectangles. I realized that I was looking at the remains of a town. It had been razed to the foundations by the waves. I don't have a photographic memory, but I have snapshots of certain things that will never leave me. 3 of them are the images of the 2 corpses and the little squares barely sticking up out of the mud. It's been almost 8 years, and I can still see them like it was yesterday. A little bit more of getting to know your narrator. I was on the USS Nimitz on a Marine detachment a long time ago. I knew the ship that was in this story, and that was terrible what they had to see, but glad they were able to help some of the people that were afflicted by that tragedy. A family friend of mine had a broken gun his dad gave him. He would jokingly point it at people and pull the trigger and watch them flip out for entertainment. Right. I did not approve. I walked into his room one day and he pointed it at me, so I flipped out on him, telling him how dangerous that was, and if he ever pointed a gun at me, joking or not, I would beat the shit out of him. I was 5 or so years old than him. We grew up together our whole lives. He tells me to calm down, telling me the gun doesn't work. I didn't listen, still lecturing him about gun safety. He got mad and said, "It doesn't work," and put the gun to his head and pulled the trigger. It went off. It happened 2 feet away from me. I saw everything. He lived on life support for about a week before his dad finally let him go. His head was the size of a pumpkin. I saw my great-grandmother after she had passed away when I was 14. She was 80 years old and was very sick for a couple of months prior to her death. She had lost a lot of weight and almost looked like a different person towards the end. My parents and I got the call that she had passed. I was heartbroken that morning. A few hours later, we went to my great-grandparents' house thinking the hospice and the family had taken her there. Oh no, she was still there. Nobody bothered to mention that to me when I went in the house. There she was, the withered shell of my beloved great-grandma. Her mouth was open, as were her eyes. That image haunted my dreams for years afterward. When I was about 9 or 10, I was in the car with my mom on the way back from the supermarket, and we drove past these kids whacking an overturned box with sticks. Curious, my mom slowed down a bit, and as she did, the kids lifted the box to reveal this tiny ginger kitten, which they proceeded to beat to death with the sticks. My mom got out and tried to save it, but by the time she got back to the car, it was just a sad, bloody mess. I couldn't drive down that road for a long time after that. What kind of sick, twisted little jerks would do that to an animal? That's just horrible. Jesus, nothing nearly as bad as that, but I was driving someone to the airport while it was raining pretty heavily. On the interstate, I got cut off by a vehicle causing me to swerve. The back end of the car hit the front end of a semi. My car wrapped to the front of the semi, such that the driver's side window was touching the Mac insignia on the grille. I was pushed what seemed like forever before the truck could slow down. My car then disengaged and the wheels tried to auto-correct, slamming itself into the median. If it hadn't been raining, my car would have flipped, and I would probably be dead. My parents picked me up and took my friend to the airport. After he disembarks, I broke down crying. I was probably still in shock. I went home and slept for the rest of the day. Obviously, it took me a while to drive while raining. It probably happened 4 years ago, just after I got my driving license, and I was driving back home on a rainy day, March. At some point, I got passed by a motorcycle that was driving with and around 130 to 140 kilometers per hour. Who uses kmh, right? On the road that had a limit of 90 kmh. It just seemed like a green wasp flying past me so fast that I only caught a glimpse of it. All I could think was, well, this dumbass is just asking for it. 5 minutes later, I was passing the scene of body parts all over the road and a motorcycle that is deep inside the back of a truck. The guy's body was in bits around the rear, and his head was rolling in front of the truck. And the truck was an old piece of Russian machinery, which is made to be literally indestructible. Needless to say, there was an ambulance on its way to scrape him off the asphalt. After that, I've pretty much been on my toes around any motorcycles, trying to keep as much distance as I can. Also, got me quite scared of driving for a week or so. 2 Christmas Eves ago, I was coming home from a bar, and in front of my apartment I saw a few people standing in the street. As I got closer, I saw a man laying in the street screaming, his bicycle crumpled up a good 15 feet from him, blood rolling down the street. Witnesses said it was a hit and run. The cyclist was in shock, and he started to dig his fingers into his head. It was disgusting, sad, and I never felt so helpless. The few minutes before 911 came was the longest moment of my life. The cyclist was really getting into his cuts in a totally confused way until a random stranger held him down, who later was drenched in blood and had to be hosed down. Eventually help came, and he was taken to the hospital, but didn't make it. Now there's a stop sign at that intersection he was hit, but it still bothers me to think about it today, and at least wish I saw the car that hit him. Rest in peace. It got in your mouth? Shit, man, that is effing heavy, especially as a kid. I'm sorry you had to see that. People are so stupid. Anyway, this past year by my college, there was a car accident. Not too out of the ordinary, as it turns out, in the country, and people crash all the time and have their cars totaled but are pretty much fine. I was coming home from a dance class in the city, and one of the roads was closed so they could pick up after the accident. No big deal. Later that night around 11:30, I got hungry. All the dining halls were closed, so I decided to drive up the road to Sheetz. It was the road that had been closed, but everything was fine again, so they opened it. Well, it wasn't fully clean. I guess it had been a really horrible accident. The scene was clear, no smashed cars or bodies, but there was broken glass all over the road. And then after I passed the broken glass, I saw it. The entire stretch of road before me was soaked in blood, with pieces of flesh. I honestly couldn't tell you if it was skin, muscle, intestine, or what in it. It isn't nearly as horrifying as some of the other stories here. I never saw the people die, but what makes it so horrible to me is that I didn't consider it moving until I thought about it later. I saw blood on the streets and just thought, oh, right, at first. But shit, man, that's someone's kid, maybe someone's parent. Someone probably loved those people so much it kept them awake at night. Someone kissed their faces, watched them sleep to make sure that they were breathing. Someone kissed them goodbye that morning and never expected them to not make it home that night. And all that blood and flesh was once inside their body, and now it's soaking into the road like they're a possum or squirrel. All of those things used to be neatly tucked inside them and keeping them alive. Now it's just a mess to be cleaned up. Someone's going through the worst night of their lives, learning that their loved one was smashed to bits on a country interstate. How would they feel if they knew their blood was still red and soaking into the road, and then I drove over it on my way to get a sandwich? When I was like 7 or 8, I was at the park with my friend. We were skipping rocks across the lake when a gaggle of geese came from around the bend. My friend took a rock and skipped it at one of them. It skipped twice, then banked up into the air and hit a goose directly in the head. His neck snapped and fell to the side. I started honking and screaming in pain, swimming over to the shore where we were. He was trying to lift his head, but he couldn't. And when he got close enough, I saw the hole in his head where the rock had hit him. I could see his brain. I ran away as fast as I could, but the image and sound was burned into my memory. I'm crying while I write this because to this day, it is one of the saddest things I have ever seen. Luckily, I've never seen a human die, but this goose was seriously effed up. I called animal control when I got home, but I doubt they did anything. Later in college, I rescued a baby goose egg and hatched it in my room. Eggy Fowler, the baby goose, was a good gift, and raised him made me feel better about the goose I saw die. The story evoked an instant memory for me. I played a tournament softball team a long time ago, and one of the schmucks that I didn't know very well, there was a flock of geese out by a little pond, and he threw a softball at one. It hit a goose in the side of the head, and same thing, it just flopped over. and we beat him up. That's a true story. This isn't nearly as terrible as seeing it live, but this one stuck with me. It was the olden days of dial-up internet, before torrents. We're talking Napster, Kazaa, olden days. Naturally, anything you downloaded took forever, and things weren't always labeled correctly. Me, being a young teen, just needed the latest Britney Spears video for science, of course. So I happily click my download and wait the several hours for completion. Hours pass and download completes. I'm ready for some baby hit me one more time kinda sweet action. The video opens to a boot pressing down on the neck of some young man, laughing in the background, man wheezing for air, then a knife right into the throat. To this day, I have no idea if this was real or just some effects shot. I still don't like to think about it, and very rarely now download Britney Spears videos. I witnessed a father swerve out of the way of a driver whom had fallen asleep at the wheel, only to witness the car smash into his wife's car, which was following. I was the first on scene and initially went to the wife's car. Her sternum was crushed, and I initially thought the daughter was dead. I went to the teenager's car to check him out, and he was pretty banged up. The door was wrecked and shit was leaking, so I pulled him out of the window and took him over to the side of the road using an extra shirt I had as a tourniquet. He looked me dead in the eyes and asked me if anyone was hurt. I didn't say anything, but I looked him back. He knew exactly what it meant. He broke down there, and I just chilled, telling him it was an accident, and his life will go on until the police arrived. He was on his way home from soccer practice or some shit and just fell asleep. Sometime during that ordeal, the driver of the truck made his way over to the wife and let out a shriek that will be with me forever. It was a sound of helpless terror. I wish it on no one. However, moments later, his daughter began to cry, assuring us all that she was not dead. The wife was killed instantly, and the daughter was in critical for a long time. I also couldn't cross traffic correctly for a day or two, and the smell of radiator fluid will stick with me forever. The accident was in, I believe, Haynesville, Illinois, right outside Grays Lake on Route 120 in probably 2001, 2002.